My name is Lauren Parker, and I am 36 years old. Chicago has been my home for more than a decade. For 10 years, I believed love meant sacrifice. I paid for my sister's wedding, I covered my mother's surgery, I kept a roof over their heads when they had nothing. I thought one day they would see me not as a bank, but as a daughter. Then, one winter night, my phone rang. My father's voice was sharp, final. "If you don't give Megan $150,000, don't bother coming home for Christmas." And my mother whispered, "Listen to your father." In that moment, something inside me broke. Love had turned into a transaction, and I was done paying the price. What would you do if your family told you money was the ticket to Christmas? If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. It was late on a December night. The wind off Lake Michigan rattled the windows of my condo, and snow swirled under the streetlights below. I had just changed into pajamas after another long day at Harrison & Cole Consulting. My body ached from hours bent over spreadsheets, and I was ready to collapse into bed. I pulled the blanket back and felt the cool cotton sheets against my hands. That was when the phone on my nightstand lit up the screen, glowing with a name I knew by heart. Dad. I stared at the word for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the green icon. A part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. It was nearly midnight, and my father never called this late unless something was wrong. The snow hissed softly against the glass, the city outside muffled and still. Finally, I swiped. "Hello?" My voice came out tight. "Lauren." My father's voice was flat, almost metallic. Eric Parker, 62 years old, retired mechanic, the man who once taught me how to ride a bike in our backyard. Now he sounded like a stranger. "I'm only going to say this once. If you don't give your sister the money she needs, $150,000, don't bother coming home for Christmas." My breath caught in my throat. "Dad, what are you serious?" My pulse hammered in my ears. I sat up straighter in bed, pressing the phone harder to my ear as if I had misheard. He repeated himself slower this time, the words sharp as glass. "No money for Megan, no Christmas for you." I could hear muffled sounds in the background, the familiar hum of the television in their living room back in Springfield. Then my mother's voice drifted through, tired but firm, Diane Parker at 60 years old, still able to slice me open with just a few words. "Lauren." She sighed. "You should listen to your father." For a second I forgot how to breathe. They had said things like this before. Accusations, guilt trips, but never so blunt, never so final. "You're telling me that unless I write a check for $150,000, I'm not welcome in my own parents' house?" My voice cracked on the last word. Silence answered me. Then Dad muttered, "You heard me." The line was dead a second later. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, staring into the darkness of my bedroom. The faint glow from the skyline painted the walls in blue and silver. My reflection in the window looked pale, stunned. I let the phone slip onto the blanket and dragged both hands down my face. My chest felt hollow, as if the air had been punched out of me. For years I had told myself that if I kept helping, kept sacrificing, my family would finally see my worth. I had covered rent, weddings, medical bills, vacations, all without a word. I thought it was love. But this was a transaction. Love in my family had become conditional, and the price tag tonight was $150,000. I curled my knees up to my chest on the mattress, rocking slightly as if that would ground me. The snow outside fell heavier, blurring the city lights. I remembered Christmases as a little girl racing down the hallway in our ranch house in Springfield, Dad waiting with a camcorder, Mom holding mugs of cocoa. The memory stung now like something stolen. I whispered into the quiet, "How did we get here?" My own voice sounded foreign, thick with disbelief. The anger came next, hot and fast, bubbling up from somewhere deep. My hands clenched around the phone until my knuckles ached. I replayed his words over and over. No money, no Christmas. The ultimatum slammed into me like a door shutting. My father's voice, my mother's sigh, the weight of decades of being the dependable one. It all pressed down until I thought I might scream. Instead, I sat perfectly still, my heart racing, my jaw tight. In that silence, I felt something shift inside me. Pain and fury tangled together, solidifying into something harder, sharper. My eyes locked on the reflection in the glass, the outline of a woman who had given everything, and was now being told she was worth nothing unless she paid again. I gripped the phone one last time and whispered, "Not this time." The city outside kept snowing uncaring while I sat there in the dim light, my body rigid, the choice echoing in my head. I stayed like that for a long while until the cold from the window seeped into the room, and I realized I wasn't trembling from fear anymore. I was trembling from rage. By the next morning, I couldn't shake the pounding in my chest. I poured coffee into a mug, but it sat untouched on the counter as I stared out at the city, still buried in snow. My father's words kept circling in my mind, each replay digging deeper. And so to calm myself, I did what I'd always done. I started running numbers. It's the only language that's ever given me clarity. Figures don't lie, not the way people do. I pulled out my laptop and opened a spreadsheet, letting the cursor blink while I typed in dates and amounts. The last 5 years of my life reduced to cells and rows, the quiet math of everything I had given away. 2018. That was when Megan and her husband Tyler asked if they could temporarily stay in my condo in Oak Park. I had bought that 2-bedroom after years of working 70-hour weeks, telling myself it was an investment. Rent in that neighborhood easily went for $2,200 a month. 5 years later, they were still there, never paying a cent. I added the totals, my stomach twisting when the number climbed past $120,000 in lost rent. 2019. Megan's wedding. She cried to me over the phone about how she couldn't afford the dress, the catering, the photographer. "It's once in a lifetime, Lauren," she pleaded. Against my better judgment, I wrote the checks. I remembered standing at the reception, tucked at a table near the back, watching her twirl in a white gown under the lights. Everyone toasted the happy couple. No one mentioned the sister who made the entire evening possible. Later that same year, I booked flights to Hawaii for all of us. Mom, Dad, Megan, and Tyler. I thought maybe if we had a vacation together, they'd see me as more than just the reliable one. I paid for the hotel, the rental car, every dinner. I can still picture my mother standing on the balcony of the resort, the ocean wind in her hair, smiling like she had the world. That trip cost me over $15,000, and still the thank yous faded by the time we landed back in Illinois. 2020. Mom's teeth. She needed extensive dental work and called me crying because the insurance wouldn't cover it. I told her not to worry, then wired the money directly to the clinic. More than 10 grand gone in a heartbeat, but I told myself family came first. She kissed my cheek after the surgery and whispered, "I don't know what we'd do without you." That tenderness lasted a week. 2021. Dad's truck broke down. He had always prided himself on fixing anything with an engine, but this time the repairs were beyond him. I swiped my card at the mechanic's shop while he stood beside me, silent. He didn't say thank you then either. By the time I leaned back in my chair, my spreadsheet was filled with numbers I already knew in my bones. Thousands upon thousands spent, the sum of sacrifices no one kept track of but me. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples, whispering, "What did it ever buy me?" I thought back to those years, to the exhaustion that wrapped itself around my body like a second skin. Nights at Harrison and Cole when the rest of the office had gone home and only the glow of my computer kept me company. I remembered the janitor pushing his cart past my cubicle, giving me a sympathetic nod as I tapped numbers into reports, eyes burning. I was building stability, I told myself, not just for me but for everyone. And yet every time the phone rang, I braced myself, knowing it would be another request. They never even disguised it anymore. "Lauren, can you cover this?" "Lauren, we're short on rent." "Lauren, you'll get it back when we're on our feet." On their feet never came. I was the one on my feet, paying, juggling, pushing forward while they leaned on me like a crutch they never intended to let go of. I stared at the spreadsheet again. 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Year after year, line after line, proof of my role. And now at the end of 2023, my father was telling me that unless I paid again, unless I emptied even more of myself, I didn't deserve a seat at Christmas dinner. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the still apartment. For a long moment, I sat in the quiet, my fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. The truth cut deep. I had stopped being their daughter a long time ago. Somewhere along the way, I had become their bank. The city outside kept moving, buses grumbling down icy streets, sirens wailing faintly in the distance. I rose and walked to the window, pressing my forehead to the cold glass. The lights of Chicago stretched out in neat grids, indifferent to my unraveling. My reflection stared back at me, weary, hollow-eyed. I whispered to her, to myself, "You're not their daughter anymore. You're their account balance." And in that bitter truth, I felt something break a crack that let the anger flood in. The morning air cut like glass as I stepped onto the sidewalk in downtown Chicago. The sky was a pale gray, the kind of winter light that never fully woke up, and the streets churned with bundled-up commuters rushing toward revolving doors. Car horns blared, buses hissed at icy curbs, and every breath turned into steam as I hurried toward the tall glass tower of Harrison and Cole Consulting. The lobby smelled of coffee and wet wool, a symphony of damp coats shaken out by people stomping snow from their boots. I pressed the elevator button and joined the cluster of suits and scarves, each of us staring at the numbers blinking upward. My stomach felt like a stone, not because of the workload, but because my father's voice still echoed in my head. No money, no Christmas. When the doors opened on the 23rd floor, the familiar buzz hit me. Phones ringing keyboards, clattering voices carrying behind glass-walled conference rooms. The end-of-year pressure was palpable. Deadlines, quotas, contracts. Everybody was moving faster, eyes sharper. I slid into my cubicle and set down my bag, trying to push away the lingering fog of last night. It didn't last. A shadow fell across my desk, and I looked up to see Mr. Thompson standing there, 55 years old, hair silver at the temples, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't smile. Lauren, my office. Now, I followed him down the hall, the soles of my boots squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Inside, the blinds were half drawn, and behind him the Chicago skyline stretched like steel teeth against the clouds. He shut the door and sat heavily behind his desk. A thick folder lay in front of him, stamped with the Marston Group logo. He tapped it once with a blunt finger. "This contract has to be closed before the year ends. If it slips, we're looking at millions lost, not just for the firm, but for our reputation. I need you 100% in this, Lauren. No distractions." I swallowed my throat dry. "Of course, sir. I'll handle it." His eyes stayed on me, piercing. "You've always delivered. But I can see it. You're somewhere else lately. Whatever it is, fix it. We can't afford you being off your game." The words lodged in me like barbs. I nodded again because what else could I do? I understand. When he finally dismissed me, I walked back to my desk with my ears buzzing. I opened the folder, scanned the rows of numbers, the timelines, the penalty clauses. I tried to force my focus onto the spreadsheets, but every column blurred into my father's ultimatum. No money, no Christmas. It rang louder than Mr. Thompson's warning, louder than the phones ringing all around me. I rubbed at my temple, trying to will the pounding away. That was when Monica appeared, leaning casually against the edge of my cubicle. She held her ever-present travel mug of tea steam curling upward. 36 like me, but somehow she always looked less worn down. Her eyes softened when she saw my face. "Rough morning," she asked. "You could say that." I forced a weak smile. She lowered her voice. "Want to talk about it?" I shook my head at first, but the concern in her gaze cracked something open. "It's my family," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. They want money again. A lot of it." Monica raised her brows. "How much are we talking? 150,000. Her whistle was low but sharp. "Jesus, Lauren." She set her mug down on my desk and folded her arms. And let me guess they called you selfish when you said no. The lump in my throat tightened. I didn't have to answer. It was written all over my face. Lauren, she said firmly, you can't keep doing this. You've been bailing them out for years. At some point, they have to stand on their own. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're survival. I stared down at the open folder, the neat columns of figures swimming in my vision. They're my family, I murmured. If I don't help, who will? Her hand touched my arm, grounding me. If you keep this up, there won't be anything left of you to help anyone. They're using you and you know it. The truth of it stung more than I wanted to admit. I nodded stiffly, not trusting myself to speak. Monica studied me another moment, then picked up her mug. I'm making tea downstairs in 10. Come find me. She gave me a small encouraging smile before disappearing back into the flow of the office. I sat there, the hum of the floor buzzing around me, but my mind was a storm. My father's ultimatum. My mother's sigh. Mr. Thompson's warning. Monica's voice urging me to draw a line. It all twisted together until I felt like I was being pulled apart from every angle. I pushed away from my desk and slipped into the restroom down the hall. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the air too sterile. I gripped the edge of the sink and lifted my gaze to the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than 36. Dark circles bruised her eyes, her skin pale under the unforgiving light. My shoulders sagged inside my blazer, my mouth pressed thin. I whispered to my reflection, when will it ever be enough? The mirror didn't answer. Only the sound of water dripping slowly from the faucet filled the silence as I clung to the sink, wondering how much longer I could carry everything before I broke. That evening, I drove across the river to a small cafe tucked on a quiet corner of Oak Park, the kind with dim lights and mismatched wooden tables. The snow outside clung to my coat as I stepped in the bell over the door, jingling. Megan was already there, hunched over a stack of papers spread across the table. Tyler sat beside her, scrolling on his phone, looking restless. She looked up the moment I approached. Her eyes were bright, too bright, as if she'd rehearsed this moment for days. Lauren, thank God you came. I pulled out the chair opposite her and set my bag down. You said you wanted to show me something. Yes. She pushed the pile of papers toward me, pages scrawled with notes and numbers. This is it, my subscription service. People pay a monthly fee and get curated local products delivered right to their doors. It's going to be huge. I sifted through the papers, my fingers smudging ink from rushed handwriting. There were no supplier contracts, no detailed budgets, just slogans and rough sketches of boxes. Megan, I said carefully, this looks like every subscription box I've ever seen. That market is already saturated. She shook her head fiercely, curls bouncing. Not like this. Nobody's doing it the way I plan to. Support local businesses, build community. It's different. I just need the capital to launch. I leaned back, trying to keep my tone even. How much? Her eyes met mine, unwavering. 150,000. She said it as if it were a normal number, like she was asking for cab fare. My chest tightened. That's not small change, Megan. That's years of savings. Do you understand what you're asking? You have it, she snapped, her voice rising. You have your condo here, your downtown apartment, your job at that fancy firm. It's nothing for you. Heat flushed my face, but I kept my voice calm. You've never run a business. Logistics alone would bury you. Returns, suppliers, customer complaints. Companies with real capital and experienced teams fail at this all the time. Why should I hand over my retirement for an idea you scribbled on napkins? Her eyes filled with tears, the anger shimmering into wounded pride. You always look down on me. Ever since we were kids, you've thought you were better. You think just because you got out, got your degrees, your job in the city, that you're smarter than me. That's not what I'm saying. My voice cracked despite myself. I'm saying you don't understand the risk. This isn't about me thinking I'm better. It's about protecting you from something that will sink you. Tyler finally looked up from his phone, his expression tight. "We're already drowning, Lauren. We've maxed out credit cards. We're behind on bills. If we don't make this work, we'll lose everything." I stared at him at the desperation in his eyes. "And you think gambling with 150 grand is the way out? It's the only shot we've got," he muttered, voice low but heavy. I pressed my hands flat on the table, the wood cool under my palms. "I've supported you both for years. Rent-free living the wedding, the vacations, the emergencies. I have given and given until I feel hollow. And now you're telling me I owe you even more." Megan's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood, her tears spilling over. Heads turned at nearby tables. "If you don't help me," she shouted, her voice cracking in the quiet cafe, "then you're not my sister anymore." The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. Conversations around us faltered, customers turning to stare. My face burned as silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. I sat frozen, my mouth dry, while Megan's eyes blazed down at me. Tyler shifted uncomfortably but didn't tell her to sit. She snatched the stack of papers back, hugging them against her chest like a shield. The barista glanced nervously our way, then back down at the counter. The entire cafe seemed to pulse with Megan's words, the judgment of strangers pressing in. I forced myself to rise slowly, my legs trembling. "If that's what it takes to be your sister, Megan," I said quietly, "then maybe I never was." Her sob caught in her throat, raw and sharp. I turned toward the door, the bell chiming above me as I stepped out into the cold. The snow was falling harder now, flakes stinging my cheeks, and the night air felt like ice in my lungs. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, the glow of the cafe spilling behind me, her voice still echoing in my ears. No sister, no family, no mercy. Then I started walking. The crunch of my boots loud in the frozen quiet, my hands shoved deep into my coat pockets to steady the shaking. By Saturday morning, I was already on the highway, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The road stretched long and wide ahead of me, carved by plows but still slick with patches of ice. Bare trees lined the interstate like black scars against the winter sky. I told myself over and over this trip was about peace, about trying one last time to mend something that felt broken beyond repair. 2 hours later, I pulled into Springfield. My parents' neighborhood looked like a snow globe. Lawns blanketed in white roofs glinting with icicles and every porch wrapped in lights. When I turned into their driveway, my chest tightened. The Parker house stood just as it always had, with red and green bulbs strung across the gutters, a plastic Santa waving from the yard, and a wreath on the door. On the surface, it was the same house I grew up in, but the warmth I once felt had drained away. I parked and sat for a moment, engine idling, my breath clouding the windshield. Finally, I shut it off, grabbed my bag, and walked up the icy steps. My hand shook as I rang the bell. Mom opened the door. Her smile was polite, not warm. "Lauren, I didn't know you were coming." "I wanted to talk," I said. My voice sounded small. She stepped aside, letting me in. The familiar scent of cinnamon candles and roasted coffee filled the hallway. The house looked exactly as it did every December. Stockings over the fireplace garland on the banister, the dining table already set with red linens. But the air was heavier now. Dad sat in his recliner, remote in hand, television muted. Megan was curled on the couch, arms crossed, phone clutched tightly like a weapon. Tyler hovered near her eyes, downcast, avoiding mine. We gathered at the table. I lowered myself into a chair, every muscle tight. For a while, the only sound was the scrape of silverware against plates. I tried to start a conversation, asked about Dad's truck, about Mom's garden, even about Megan's job prospects. None of it landed. Megan rolled her eyes. Tyler stared at his food. Mom fussed with her napkin, and Dad's jaw was locked shut. Finally, he set down his fork. His gaze met mine, cold and unblinking. Family means sacrifice, Lauren. If you don't understand that, then you don't belong at this table for Christmas. The words hit like a slap. My throat tightened, heat rising up my neck. Sacrifice, I repeated. My voice shook, but I forced it louder. Who paid for Megan's wedding? Who covered Mom's surgery when the insurance wouldn't? Who paid for your truck repairs? Dad. Megan shot me a glare. You don't need to keep score, it's not keeping score, I snapped. It's proof that I've been here supporting every single one of you over and over again. And the second I say no, suddenly I'm the selfish one. No one spoke. The silence was worse than shouting. Mom looked down at her plate eyes, refusing to meet mine. Tyler swallowed hard but said nothing. Dad's face hardened further, a wall I couldn't climb. I felt the sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. My chest burned as I pushed back from the table. The legs of my chair screeched against the floor. I laid my fork and knife down with a sharp clink that made everyone flinch. Without another word, I walked to the front door. The cold air rushed in the moment I opened it, biting against my face, stealing my breath. Behind me, no one called my name. Not my father, not my mother, not even my sister. The wind slapped me as I stepped outside the night, pressing in the wreath on the door, brushing against my arm as it swung shut behind me. I stood for a moment on the porch, the sound of my heartbeat louder than the carols drifting faintly from a neighbor's house. Then I walked down the icy steps, each footfall echoing like a decision I couldn't take back. A week later, the phone rang just as I was pouring myself a glass of water. Mom's name lit up the screen, and for a split second I felt something warm, the hope that maybe she was ready to talk. I answered quickly, pressing the phone to my ear. Her voice was clipped, rehearsed. Lauren, don't come for Christmas this year. Megan says she can't stand to see you right now. The words knocked the air out of me. I gripped the counter with my free hand. Mom, you're really telling me not to come home for Christmas? We think it's for the best, she said, as if reading from a script. You made your choice when you refused to help your sister. This is the consequence. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the twinkle lights I'd strung around the window flickering weakly. In the corner, my tree glowed with white bulbs, and beneath it sat a pile of neatly wrapped gifts. A cashmere scarf for Mom. A bottle of bourbon for Dad. Cookware Megan had once said she wanted. My throat tightened as I stared at them, mocking me with their bright ribbons and tags. I tried calling Megan. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. Finally, I left a message, my voice breaking. Megan, please, can we talk? Can we just... The beep cut me off before I could finish. 10 minutes later, a text buzzed through. Her words were sharp enough to slice, "Don't call me again. There's nothing left to say." I sank down onto the sofa, staring blankly at the lights on my tree. Outside my window, Michigan Avenue was alive with color. Couples hurried past carrying shopping bags. Kids pointed at the massive Christmas displays. Taxis honked as they crawled through traffic. In apartment windows across the street, families decorated their trees, laughter drifting faintly when someone opened a door to step onto a balcony. Inside my condo, silence pressed in thick and heavy. The gifts under my tree sat untouched, reminders of how much I had given and how little it had mattered. I thought about all the Christmases I had made possible. Flying everyone to Hawaii, paying for the fancy dinners when Dad's card declined, covering the little emergencies no one else would handle. I had been the one to keep the season bright, and now I was being shut out completely. I picked up one of the packages, the cashmere scarf wrapped in silver paper. My fingers traced the ribbon, and for a moment I imagined Mom opening it, smiling, saying, "Thank you." But that image dissolved into the sound of her voice on the phone. "Don't come for Christmas." The tears burned hot behind my eyes, but I forced them back. I would not cry for people who had already decided I wasn't family unless I paid the entry fee. I set the box back down with a thud. The ache in my chest shifted into something harder, colder. My father's ultimatum. My sisters screaming in the cafe. My mother's voice tonight. One by one they stacked like bricks until they formed a wall, On the other side of it, there was no way back. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the tree until the lights blurred. "I won't beg," I whispered into the empty room. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Not anymore. The city outside glittered with holiday joy, but in my living room all that was left was steel. Snow fell heavier the next afternoon, fat flakes spinning down like white ash when I pushed open the glass door to a cafe near the Cook County Courthouse. The air inside was warm, thick with the scent of espresso and baked bread. I spotted Claire Johnson instantly. Her auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, a navy blazer still dusted with snow, a leather briefcase at her feet. She rose when she saw me, giving me the kind of hug only an old friend could. "Lauren, you sounded serious on the phone." I managed a tight smile and slid into the chair across from her. My hands curled around the mug of coffee the barista had just set down, trying to draw some steadiness from the heat. Outside, traffic hissed through slush, and people hurried past with their collars turned up against the wind. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted, my voice low. "They've pushed me out." "Mom said I shouldn't come for Christmas. Megan won't take my calls. Dad's furious, and it's all because I wouldn't hand over $150,000. Claire's expression sharpened, but she only nodded, encouraging me to continue. "I've carried them for years," I said, the words spilling now that I'd finally given them air. "I paid for the wedding, the medical bills, the vacations. I let Megan and Tyler live rent-free in Oak Park. And now they're acting like I'm heartless because I finally said no." Claire leaned forward, her voice steady, professional, but kind. "Lauren, listen to me. This isn't just family drama. It's financial entanglement, and that gives them power over you. Tell me, are any of your accounts still linked?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Mom's an authorized user on one of my credit cards. I've got auto payments still running for utilities on the Oak Park place. And I've covered their mortgage once or twice when they fell behind." Claire exhaled a soft whistle. "Then you're exposed. As long as those links exist, they can keep draining you whether you say yes or not. You need to cut it off now." The firmness in her tone made my stomach twist. "If I do that, it'll be final. There won't be any way back. They've already shut the door," she said gently. "They made their choice. Now it's your turn to protect yourself." I stared down into my coffee, watching the cream swirl into fading shapes. My hands shook when I set the cup down. "It feels like betraying them." "No," Claire corrected softly. "It feels like drawing a line you should have drawn a long time ago." Her words sank into me like stones. I thought about Dad's voice. No money, no Christmas. Mom telling me not to come. Megan screaming in the cafe. Each memory burned until all I could feel was the raw outline of a decision. I pulled my laptop from my bag, the silver surface cold under my palms. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling. Claire watched quietly, giving me space. The cursor blinked on the screen, a silent dare. I typed slowly, carefully. "An email to my bank, remove all authorized users immediately. Close every card tied to my family. Cancel the auto payments on Oak Park utilities. Freeze accounts that could be accessed." My heart thudded harder with each word. When I reached the end, I stopped. The screen blurred as tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't blink them away. I thought of every night I'd stayed up calculating numbers to make sure bills were covered, every holiday I had salvaged when things fell apart, every time I told myself family meant giving until it hurt. Claire's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Send it, Lauren." I drew in a shaky breath. My thumb hovered over the trackpad, and for a long second I couldn't move. Then I clicked. The whoosh of the email leaving was almost inaudible, but it felt deafening in my chest. A weight slid off my shoulders so suddenly I nearly sagged in the chair. Claire reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You did the right thing." I nodded, though my throat was too tight for words. The cafe hummed around us with the low murmur of voices, the hiss of steaming milk, the clink of cups. Outside, snow blurred the street, erasing footprints as quickly as they were made. I closed the laptop slowly, my fingers still trembling, but not from fear. For the first time in years, it felt like I had taken back something that belonged to me. Christmas Eve settled over the city like a heavy blanket, the streets slick with ice street lamps, glowing halos into the drifting snow. I drove in silence toward Oak Park, my breath fogging faintly inside the car, the heater blasting, but doing little to thaw the weight pressing against my ribs. The closer I got, the more familiar the route became, each turn a reminder of the years I had surrendered this place to Megan and Tyler. The hallway was dim when I arrived, the bulbs overhead flickering as if tired of holding on. My boots echoed on the cracked linoleum as I carried a box of empty bins to the door. The key turned smoothly in the lock, my lock, and the door swung open. The smell hit me first. Stale air mixed with something sour like old takeout left to rot. The living room was chaos, clothes in heaps. Half-empty coffee cups lined the windowsill, dishes crusted with food sat on the table. Makeup brushes were scattered across the floor like dropped matches, and Tyler's boots were tossed carelessly in the corner. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, gripping the frame, fury and grief battling in my chest. This was the condo I had bought with years of long nights and disciplined saving. And this was what it had been reduced to. I rolled up my sleeves and started. The bedroom first. I yanked open drawers stuffed with wrinkled shirts, folded them briskly and shoved them into bins. Sweaters reeking of perfume, piles of jeans, shoes still with tags. They all went in. Under the bed I found unopened bills shoved into a shoebox, envelopes torn, but unpaid. My jaw tightened as I added them to the growing pile. The bathroom was worse. Bottles of foundation half spilled on the counter. Tyler's razor-rusted towels mildewed in a corner. I stuffed it all into trash bags, tying the knots tight. By the time I dragged the first load down to my car, sweat had dampened my back despite the freezing night. The snow bit at my face, flakes stinging my eyes, but I kept moving. 3 trips in total. Each time the bins filled the trunk, I drove them to the storage unit I'd rented earlier that day. The attendant, a middle-aged man in a thick parka, eyed the growing mountain of boxes. "How long you want this unit for?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "Just 1 month," I said, my voice steady, though my arms trembled from hauling. "After that, it's not my problem." He nodded without comment, scribbling on his sheet, then handed me a padlock. The clang of metal closing over steel rang like punctuation at the end of a sentence I should have written years ago. When the last load was stacked neatly in the unit, I shut the door and slid the lock into place. My breath fogged in the cold, but inside my chest, something lighter stirred. Back at the condo, the locksmith was waiting. He carried his toolbox up the stairs, nodding politely. "Shouldn't take long," he said. I leaned against the hallway wall as he worked the metallic scrape and click of tools echoing through the empty rooms. One by one, the old locks fell, landing with dull thuds. He fitted the new ones in place, shiny and unmarked. The sound of the final bolt sliding home reverberated through the silence, sharper than any bell. "Here you go," he said, handing me 2 new keys. "Merry Christmas." I thanked him, my voice catching slightly, and watched as his footsteps faded down the hall. Sos. The condo was still now. No clutter, no noise, no shadows of someone else's life spilling into corners. I walked slowly through each room. The bedroom with its bare mattress, the kitchen counter scrubbed clean, the living room stripped of chaos. My footsteps echoed against the walls. In the center of the living room I stopped. The air was cool against my skin, my breath shaky as I exhaled. My fingers curled tight around the keys in my palm, the edges pressing into my skin. "This is mine," I whispered, my voice breaking but fierce. My chest rose and fell, the silence wrapping around me, not as emptiness, but as freedom. For the first time in years, I was standing in my own space, untethered from their mess, their demands, their endless hunger. I stayed there until the trembling in my body eased and my eyes cleared, the city light spilling faintly through the blinds. Then I turned off the switch, locked the new door behind me, and stepped out into the snowy night, with the keys burning warm in my fist. In Springfield, the grocery store buzzed with last-minute shoppers. I wasn't there, but I could picture it as clearly as if I stood in line myself. Carol Miller. My cousin later told me everything. Dad had stepped up to the register with ham, vegetables, pies, and bottles of wine piled high on the conveyor belt. Mom hovered beside him, fussing with her purse, while Megan and Tyler trailed behind. The cashier rang up the total. Dad pulled out his card, swiped it once. Declined. He frowned, tried again. Declined. By the third attempt, his neck was flushed red. Behind them, other customers shifted impatiently, craning their necks to see what was holding up the line. Mom's hands fluttered nervously. "Eric, maybe try the other card." He grunted, pulled another from his wallet. Declined again. Voices rippled in the line. Someone whispered, "Looks like trouble." Another muttered, "Not a great time of year for that." Carol said she saw Megan stiffen, then whirl toward the gawkers. Her voice rose high, slicing through the noise. "It's Lauren." She froze. Everything. "She abandoned us right before Christmas." Heads turned. Strangers frowned. Some relatives who had joined them at the store looked on with narrowed eyes, their murmurs spreading fast. Dad's jaw tightened as he shoved his cards back into his wallet. Mom's cheeks burned as she gathered the bags they could no longer afford. The cashier's polite smile barely masked the discomfort. Carol said the silence that followed was sharper than any scolding. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message. I was curled up on my sofa in Chicago, the only light coming from the tree in the corner, ornaments glinting like small frozen stars. I held a glass of wine, the stem cool against my fingers, when Carol's name lit the screen. Her text was blunt. "Everyone's talking. Your dad's card was declined in front of half the family." He looked humiliated. I stared at the words, the letters glowing against the dark. My chest ached with a dozen emotions at once. Shame, sorrow, relief. I took a sip of wine, the bitterness grounding me. Another buzz. "Carol again. Megan told everyone you shut them off. She's crying, yelling. Some people are angry. Others are just shaking their heads." I leaned back into the cushions, the tree lights flickering across the glass of red in my hand. My eyes traveled up to the silver star perched on top of the tree, steady and unshaken. I imagined the scene again. My father fumbling with his wallet. My mother whispering in panic. Megan shouting my name like a curse in the middle of a grocery store aisle. And for the first time, I felt the balance tilt. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, small but undeniable. After years of carrying them, of being painted selfish for finally saying no, the truth was spilling into daylight. Not through my words, but through their unraveling. I set the phone aside on the table, lifted the glass again, and watched the light scatter across the surface of the wine. The silence in my condo was no longer heavy. It was sharp, clear, and for the first time in a long while it felt almost fair. 2 days later, the pounding on my front door rattled the frame so hard I thought it might splinter. I froze where I stood in the kitchen, my heart thudding. Through the peephole, I saw all 4 of them. Dad in his heavy winter coat, jaw clenched. Mom clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. Megan red-eyed and wild. Tyler hunched behind her with his hands jammed into his pockets. Before I could decide whether to open it, Dad's voice boomed through the door. "Lauren, open up now." I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped back. The moment the door swung wide, they shoved their way inside, bringing with them the sharp smell of cold air and tension. Dad rounded on me immediately, his face flushed. "You've humiliated this family. You've made us into a damn joke. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I steadied myself, spine straight, refusing to flinch. "I know exactly what I've done. I stopped being your bank." His fist clenched at his side. "You will regret this." I pulled a slip of paper from the counter and held it up. My voice stayed calm, even. "Your things are in a storage unit. I paid the first month. After that, you're on your own." Megan lunged forward, tears streaking her face. "How could you? We're family. You threw us out like garbage." I met her eyes unblinking. I gave you 5 years of free rent. That's over $120,000 gone. I paid for your wedding. I took everyone to Hawaii. I covered Mom's surgery, Dad's truck repairs. Every single time I stepped in. And now because I finally said no, I'm the villain. She sobbed harder, clutching at Tyler's arm. You're cruel, Lauren. You're heartless. Cruel, I said quietly, is treating your sister like an endless ATM. Heartless is cutting her out of Christmas unless she pays for your dreams. Tyler shifted uneasily, looking at the floor. We can't just find a place overnight. We don't have savings. We don't know what to do. That's not my problem anymore, I replied. My voice wavered just slightly, but I forced it steady. You should have thought of that before siding with Megan when she told me I wasn't her sister anymore. Mom stepped forward, her eyes brimming. Lauren, honey, please. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We just wanted you to help your sister. I pulled my arm away from her touch. Help, I've been helping for years. All I asked for was one boundary, one no. And instead of respecting it, you told me not to come home. You told me I'd learn what family means by spending Christmas alone. Well, here we are. The silence in the room grew thick. Dad's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding. Mom's tears spilled over. Tyler stayed frozen, caught between guilt and shame. Megan's shoulders heaved, rage and grief tangled together. I walked to the door and pulled it open, the winter air rushing in again. It's time for you to leave. They didn't move at first, eyes darting among each other as if waiting for me to crack to beg them to stay. But I stood firm, hand gripping the knob body, blocking the threshold. Finally, Dad grunted, turned toward Mom and guided her out. Tyler followed the slip of paper with the storage address clenched in his fist. Megan was the last. She stopped inches from me, her eyes blazing. I hate you, she whispered, her voice raw. Good, I said evenly. That makes 2 of us. She shoved past her shoulder, knocking against mine, and stormed down the hall. I closed the door behind them and locked it, my breath ragged. The condo went silent again, so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. I leaned against the wood, eyes shut, my chest rising and falling as though I'd just survived a storm. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like freedom. The phone started buzzing before sunrise and barely stopped the rest of the day. Names flashed across the screen. Dad, Mom, Megan, Tyler, one after another as if they were taking shifts trying to wear me down. By noon, there were more than 40 missed calls stacked in a row. When I finally checked the voicemail box, the messages poured in like waves crashing on top of each other. Dad's voice was sharp, seething. You've disgraced us, Lauren. You think you can humiliate your own family and get away with it. You'll regret this. Mom's message cracked with tears. Sweetheart, please undo whatever you did at the bank. We didn't mean to push you away. We just wanted you to give Megan some time. Please, let's talk. Then Megan, shrill and furious. You've ruined us. You're pathetic. You think you're better than everyone, but you're nothing without us. And finally, Tyler, his voice subdued, almost hollow. Lauren, we don't have rent money. We don't know what to do. Just call me back. I sat at the kitchen counter, listening to each one in order, thumb hovering over delete. My heart thudded, but my hand was steady. One by one, I erased them until the inbox was empty. The silence afterward was sharp and clean like a freshly cut line. That evening, my cousin Carol called. She didn't waste time on small talk. Lauren, I don't know what to say. Half the family is gossiping, but some of them, they're starting to get it. I heard Uncle Jim say maybe Megan needs to grow up. Aunt June even said you've done more than anyone could expect. People are realizing the truth. I leaned back in my chair, pressing the phone to my ear, a small breath of relief loosening in my chest. Thanks for telling me, Carol. The next day at the office, the air was just as tense as before, but something in me had shifted. I buried myself in the Marston Group contract, triple-checking numbers, drafting proposals, preparing every angle. For the first time in weeks, my mind was sharp. When Mr. Thompson called me into his office, I laid the binder on his desk, every page in order. He flipped through, eyebrows lifting slightly. When he closed it, he looked at me for a long moment. "Good work, Lauren. This could have cost us a fortune. You saved it." It was rare praise from him, and it landed heavy, warming a part of me that had been cold for so long. I nodded, unable to keep the faintest smile from tugging at my lips. That weekend, I drove back out to Oak Park this time, not to clean or to fight, but to meet the new tenants. Ethan and Julia Baker, a young married couple who both taught at a local elementary school, greeted me at the door. The apartment was spotless, the air faintly scented with cookies. Julia held out a plate wrapped in foil. "We wanted to thank you for giving us a chance. It's perfect here." I stepped inside for a quick look. The carpet was vacuumed, the counters wiped, plants thriving on the windowsill. No trash, no chaos, no tension buzzing in the walls. Just a home. Driving back into the city, I caught myself smiling, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deeper than my mouth. For years, that condo had been a source of resentment and exhaustion. Now it was a clean slate. That night, I sat in my living room, wine glass in hand, the Christmas tree lights flickering soft gold. The phone lay silent on the table beside me. For once, it wasn't buzzing with demands. It was just, still. I looked around at my condo, at the warmth I had built for myself, and let the quiet sink in. My breath slowed. The weight on my shoulders eased. Everything finally belonged back to me. The snow outside had thickened into a soft curtain by Christmas night, the kind that quieted the city until every street seemed to whisper. I sat in my condo, the skyline reflected in the tall windows, gold and silver lights, shimmering against the glass. On the table beside me, a glass of red wine caught the glow of the Christmas tree, its stem cool under my fingertips. Soft carols played low from the speaker in the corner, filling the silence without breaking it. I let myself breathe slow and steady, listening to the hum of the radiator and the faint wind pressing against the panes. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like mine. My father's voice still echoed in my mind, as sharp as the night he said it. "No money, no Christmas." I whispered into the stillness, and I chose no more money. My words drifted like smoke, fragile but final. The ache inside me was real. I won't lie about that. Losing the idea of family, even a family built on conditions, was like cutting away a limb. But beneath the ache there was something steadier, a lightness I hadn't known in a decade. It was as if a weight I had carried so long I'd forgotten its shape had finally slipped from my shoulders. I turned my gaze to the tree in the corner. It wasn't grand, not like the one at my parents' house in Springfield with its towering branches and decades of ornaments. Mine was small set in a ceramic pot I dragged home from a market on Clark Street. Its lights glowed a warm yellow, washing the room in a soft halo. I sat staring at it, letting the warmth seep into me, letting the contrast between what was lost and what was reclaimed settle into balance. I thought of past Christmases, of waking before dawn to load my car with gifts I'd bought for everyone else, of driving through snow and ice to make sure their holiday looked picture perfect. I thought of the dinners I paid for when Dad's card was declined, the times I smiled through tight jaws as relatives praised Megan for her entrepreneurial spirit, while ignoring that I'd footed the bills. I had always made sure Christmas happened, and now, sitting alone in Chicago, I realized I was finally having one for myself. The phone sat dark on the counter. No buzzing, no demands, no guilt pouring through the speaker. Just silence. I had deleted every voicemail, every plea, and every accusation. I had chosen not to answer, not to be dragged back into the cycle. Tonight, that silence was the gift. I lifted the wine glass, holding it up so the tree's light flickered through the red. My reflection in the window looked tired, yes, but steadier, freer. If family means sacrifice, I thought, then I had given more than anyone could ask. If family means love, then it should never have been bought with checks and credit card swipes. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through my chest. I know some people would say I should have forgiven them, that blood is blood and nothing should sever it. But blood alone doesn't bind respect. Respect comes from boundaries, from seeing each other as more than what can be taken. My family chose to treat me like a wallet, and when I finally shut it, they chose to treat me like a stranger. That was their decision. This was mine. Outside, the snowflakes thickened, spinning under the streetlights like sparks. Cars were few, muffled under the storm. Inside the room was still my own breathing, the only sound. I looked back at the tree one more time, its glow wrapping around the room, and let a small smile settle on my lips. If your parents told you no money meant no place at the table, I said softly, what would you do? Would you keep paying the price? Or would you finally choose your own freedom? I raised my glass toward the tree, toward the city, toward myself. The smile lingered quiet but sure as I took a long sip and leaned back into the chair, the music swelling gently, the night closing around me like peace itself.